Helena, Bill, Claudia. Okay. I'm gonna kick us off, get going, given that we only have the hour. And those who join us as we move along are always welcome to see the recording if they missed anything. So first off, again, welcome for everybody joining from around the globe. We are very much looking forward to this session. I'm here joined by two colleagues, Kentse and Pamela. So good afternoon, Kentse and Pamela. Pamela Silwana is a member of the Gqirana Community Action Network, which is part of the Cape Town Together movement or initiative that we will be discussing in more depth over the course of the session. She's also an organizer and activist with a variety of different initiatives in Gqirana and across the city. And that includes the unemployment movement, organizing for work, which we will describe at some point during this session, during this talk. And Kentse, Radebe, is my colleague at the Birth Center. Together we hold up the Systems Justice Innovation Portfolio, Kentse as project lead, and she is responsible for expanding the portfolio's work, and that includes a collection of different activities, including systems mapping, systems thinking training with client partners across the continent, running an executive education course called Systems Change and Social Impact, which we hope that you might be interested in finding out more about. And of course, as part of this particular session, really is the brains and power behind the CAN Incubator hosted at the Birth Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So I'm not going to spend too much more time with the introductions, but I will now hand over to Kentse, who will kick us off for this keynote session. Thank you, everybody. Over to you, Kentse.
Thanks, Fergus. Welcome to everybody who's joining us from wherever you're joining across the world. When we were prepping for this session, we thought, how do we introduce the stories of the CAN in a really meaningful way? And we thought that it would be really wonderful to actually share a short documentary that two members created from the CAN community. Leanne Brady and Dylan Valley directed and produced this particular documentary. And I'm going to share screen now and share with you a little bit about the story.
The coronavirus has spread to South Africa, making it the 7th country on the continent that's been affected by the outbreak.
The last thing we need in South Africa is for this virus to hit the poor and those in need hardest and to hit the rich least, because it will exacerbate divisions in South Africa.
Authorities are deeply concerned that if the virus gets into the townships, it could spread like wildfire.
Panic is palpable out there in the streets, but I'm okay.
I'm trying to remember to breathe so that it doesn't become too panic driven.
We're all feeling scared and we don't know what to do. We're figuring out things as we go.
Over the next 10 days, we can radically change the fate of this outbreak in South Africa.
We need to work together to flatten the curve, to slow the spread of new infections so that we don't overload our healthcare system.
To get involved, join our Facebook group called Cape Town Together right now.
I've just looked at the city of Cape Town's website. In all the statements they've issued, they've said nothing about informal settlements. In the many statements that they've issued, the disaster management, there's a statement about disaster management doing a soap donation drive. How are people going to use soap if they don't have water?
Let's just anticipate the worst, and as Sarah just said, let's wait up until the announcement is made by the president.
How we had envisioned these cans working, like going onto the street, educating, doing supplies, may not work, because if there's a street shutdown, you can't go help your neighbor in that way.
We anticipate that there would be fear. Is there a way that we could emphasize the fact that if we use a 21-day lockdown well, it is something that will foster solidarity and will bring the end to it?
I would like to bring this to a close, if that's okay with you all, so we can take a breather before the President's address.
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March.
The journey of some people in terms of accessing water so that we can get available. As soon as that gets started, I think we'll need the support from this team.
And the demand is simple, is that we want water before the lockdown, or no lockdown in informal settlements.
People are being infected now. We need a timeline in terms of when we must expect water in our community so that we can wash our hands using soap and water. But now we do have soap that we've bought with our money. We don't have water to wash our hands.
So kungoba sizawulinda kude nini na nakulonya kuphela asanda nanile island nihamba no boy.
Ungaqala ngokuvala iborders eCountry, it means the West is coming. Ngoku bayayibona still nabo abakenzima bathi basezawucika abanawuthi even noba kungomso at least ingomso sizameka sure ukuba sifakile noba koJojo apha kwendawo zethu so long nisiba nabo amanzi.
The city has to consider a range of health and safety and occupational health considerations before proceeding with the installation of any infrastructure.
You plan alone, plan ngam, plan wedwa. If we are planning, we must call as communities, plan together.
Now is not the time to be scoring political points. Now is the time for us to join hands and to respond to this. Because the virus has to get them the DA, has to get them the ANC, has to get them, it's a song of the virus. And that's what we must be responding to, Makaban. Amanda?
What we're trying to do as Cape Town Together is be a network in service of all the neighborhood cans and be a source that the public can trust and a source that the Department of Health can trust.
One of the key problems is that all of our organizations have been organized like as pyramids. So this idea of a centralized way of organizing almost always comes with a pyramid, with a hierarchy. Hierarchical systems are patriarchal systems. They have gatekeepers and they've got people who are in control of the narrative, and they tend to be men. And I think if we actually look across what's happened, the vast majority of people that have come into this network are actually women.
The threat of hunger and starvation has become a real issue for South Africa because of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hi guys, Pamela here. This is my mom cooking for our neighbors. So we decided to cook for our neighbors because we saw that people were hungry. Even though we were organizing them food parcels, we knew that the need for food was too much. So we started opening up 2 soup kitchens.
Just on our Gugulethu can, we managed to formulate a database of more than 2,000 households that really would be desperate during this lockdown period, especially around level 5, 4, and 3.
My name is Mzikona Mgede from the Langaken. We've been responding to COVID and also the second pandemic, which is food security and also hunger.
My name's Nadia Mayman. I'm a resident in Banjevo. I'm one of the administrators for the Banjevo Ken.
My name is Ngosikona Sotboy. I am part of the Kailicha Ken.
Welcome to Ocean View CCC. This is Ricochet van Rensburg. I'm Ramona Lam. And we would like to welcome you to our base.
Hi guys, I'm Natasha Nicholson. So basically I'm from the Lavendale Can, and this is also part of our volunteers sitting around, taking a break. So yeah, we're busy feeding the kids.
The Western Cape is now the epicenter of the country's COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to the latest national figures. It's officially overtaken Gauteng as the province with the most infections and deaths.
We have a crisis on our hands, and it's a deadly one. And at this point that we need to come together, whether you're rich or poor, because here's one disease that doesn't discriminate. Now, the urgency to organize our community came to the fore.
With our community and the food insecurity currently, it would be to our best advantage to start planting our own crop.
What we're doing here today is just rework and redo. And then hopefully next week we'll get some youth in to help with the cleanup. And by next Saturday we will be putting in some seeds, fingers crossed.
Being part of the Cape Town Together, it has showed that anyone can make a difference. No one was excluded, no one was told like there was something, let's all change Gugulethu, and there's like partnership with another can. It just brought something different, something beautiful in our township.
For me, when I shared what I was doing with other people, and they're like, oh yeah, let me join a can. It was so great to be like, here's a link for Goodwood, or here's a link for that. South Africans aren't apathetic. It's not we don't care. I just think people were tired of the current way of being and existing, and this was just such a refreshing, great space to just get your hands in there, do what you can, and just really an inspiring space. So I love that.
Here there's an opportunity of building politics that people in communities resonate with. I don't have food now, how do I make sure that my neighbor has got food? Those have always been what's lacking in our activism, that the work we're doing is high there and affecting change in the system that we're in, but it hardly changes your life as an individual.
COVID is affecting everyone, and so we're all right now present to all of these issues, but it's also carried the inequalities right into privileged suburbs of Cape Town. And so even in Kenilworth, where I am, which is a wealthy part of the city, and my only hope is that the memory of that spurs something new in terms of solidarity.
The public sector is everybody's safety net. Everybody can get in a car accident and need an ambulance. Everybody can lose their job and need like food distribution services. Those things can happen to anybody.
No one realizes how close they are to destitution in our economic system until a sustained crisis occurs. So we don't know if this COVID disaster is just the initial, if we're still in the crash period, and that there's actually going to be a prolonged depression that comes after this. This network needs to be something that can help build an alternative.
I believe that communities would have rallied around COVID-19 anyway. But we would have all been doing something in our small little pockets. I would also like to see when we emerge out of COVID, that we emerge as a unit, as a stronger South Africa, stronger neighbours, better empowered, because we've learned such a lot. And that is why it's important to be part of a bigger group, so that we can share ideas and learn from one another.
There would have been an unbelievable suffering if these community action networks were not formed. And to have been part of that, it was amazing.
COVID presents the opportunity for us to build a better society, to build stronger communities. South Africans have the ability to rally around in crisis. We are able to support one another.
So I'm going to stop sharing there because I think maybe that's a good place to stop. Whenever I see this documentary, I always get shivers. I always sort of get re-inspired again about the work that community action networks have done here in Cape Town. But maybe just to add some context or some detail that we sort of don't cover in that documentary, and maybe specifically about why the Bertha Center thought about why it would be really important for us to be involved in this work. And maybe for some context is to say that Fergus, myself, other Bertha staff members during 2020 were involved in community action networks in our own neighborhoods already. But really thinking about bringing the cans into the university space was a different kind of a decision. And I think for us at the Bertha Center, a lot of our work is around thinking about how do we move towards a more socially just and equitable society. And we looked at the work that the cans were doing, and we felt so inspired, and we're like, well, what lessons can we pull from that? Especially for those of us who are based within sort of like this, UCT is a sort of elite university in South Africa, and that can be really separated from the realities of the rest of South Africa. And I think the pandemic really highlighted the existing inequalities. And what the CAN movement did together was really bring a city together that really, in any other circumstance, might not have engaged in the ways that we started engaging. So for us, it really became then important to pull in CAN members who are really interested, especially at the beginning of 2021, to think about, well, what do we pull from this experience? What do we pull from what CANs taught us in 2020, and how do we utilize that to reinvigorate other spaces? And I think importantly, it was an important time to be having that conversation, because at the time we'd sort of just come out of our second wave in South Africa. A lot of, I think everybody who was involved in CANs at whatever level, whether it was at community kitchens, whether it was at care centers, everybody was tired, and we needed a different space, a different kind of energy. So the CANs really became sort of like the second space to do that. And for us, it was really to pull out some of the lessons that we thought were really important in that space, but also to reflect. And I think this idea of reflection became even more critical for us because we recognized how much time had shifted and changed the way that we were organizing. In the video, you'll hear the different speakers speak about how this was a different kind of politics. Right at the beginning, actually, you saw that we were all on a Zoom call. So at the height of us trying to connect people across the city, we would meet every evening at 6 p.m. and we would have a Zoom meeting, and anybody who wanted to join those sessions could join, and we would talk about various issues, whether it was access to water, access to food security, working with the Department of Health. So there was a lot of energy and there was a lot of pull from every corner. of the city. And for us then in 2021 was recognizing that a lot of those ways of organizing weren't really sustainable. People had gone back to work, children had gone back to school. There was a lot of shifts that were happening. So for us at the Bertha Center, it was really interesting to recognize how important it still was to create opportunities to convene, to create opportunities for people to come together and reflect on, well, what are the pieces of work that we do want to continue utilizing? And I think for me, organizing and engaging in the online space really emerged as something that we valued. So I think it's an important piece to reflect on. I was even thinking about yesterday's keynote address around when we're organizing online, who do we leave behind? And I think community action networks took a really strategic and intentional perspective around being really inclusive. So for example, we actually had a data fund, so that anybody who wanted to join any of our Zoom calls and couldn't would automatically be able to access data freely so that they could jump on a call. I can imagine that if we weren't able to bring about that opportunity, a lot of the kinds of people that we would have been able to pull into those spaces wouldn't have been able to be involved. And I think one of the key aspects of being involved in the CAN work was having broad stakeholder engagement. If you don't have that, then the kinds of people that are in the room don't have the different perspectives that they have. The power actually of the CANs, and I think somebody highlighted this in the video, was how we were sharing knowledge. We refer to it as collective intelligence. This idea that wherever you're based in the city, however you're choosing to respond in your community, that might have important lessons for other people across the city. And a big part of our online engagement was actually about sharing that knowledge. So we would organize co-learning sessions every week, whether it was about, organizing, whether it was about how to organize safely when we were at the height of the pandemic, or later on when it became about vaccine hesitancy. We were always creating these spaces and these opportunities to talk and be with each other. One of the pieces that I highlighted when I was chatting with Caleb right at the beginning of the Build Peace conference was sort of like our values and principles and ways of organizing that we found really useful for us. And some of them cross over into the online space because that's where we were at. But one of the key ones that I didn't mention was this idea of critical connections and relationships. In the documentary, you would have seen that we all really came together after we'd moved out of the hard lockdown in South Africa, which was sort of like in the middle of the year 2020. But it was so amazing to see a group of people who had really never seen each other face to face engage and really recognize that if we didn't have the relationships that we had, we wouldn't have been able to do this work. So I think that's something that I don't want to leave without highlighting from this conversation. This idea of working across scale. That was really powerful for us within the CANs. So for example, whether or not you're working at in your own community, thinking about how that connected to broader struggles, whether that was around food security, access to water, gender-based violence, mental health. We were always thinking quite critically about ensuring that the lessons that we were engaging in our own spaces were being spread throughout the network. One of the things that we also learned, but this was more of a reflection and in hindsight, was this idea that this is slow work. Even though it felt like the journey that we were on was really fast, and I think for a big part of it was, from when we organized on Facebook and called people to join our Facebook group to having over 170 CANs spread across the city, it really was a powerful way of organizing, but it was in recognition that it was really people that were behind engaging and pushing that kind of engagement. If we didn't have those relationships, if we didn't engage the way that we did, I don't think we would have been able to achieve what we would have been able to achieve. And a big part of that actually, and this is where I'd like to bring in my colleague Pamela, was in the work that we did within the community kitchen space when food security was really highlighted as a critical issue. So I'm going to pause here and ask my colleague Pamela to maybe share a little bit about the story of the Gugulethu CAN and specifically how the community kitchen grew from that space.
Hi everyone, my name is Pamela Silwana and I am from the township called Gugulethu. Our story goes by 2 days before lockdown. We set as an unemployment movement called Organising for Work, and we were all unemployed and we thought, what is this going to mean for us? Soon we held meetings where teachers, street committees, church leaders came into these meetings, and we talked about how would we tackle this. Luckily, we got to be introduced to Cape Town together. where they had so much information that we did not. We were so confused as to what COVID was. And once we got into Cape Town together, there were doctors, there were people that were fact-checking questions that we had. So we're like, okay, what do we do? After that, after getting the fact-check question, we're like, okay, let's distribute flyers where people can know what COVID is, because we knew if we didn't know, how much more with people that didn't have television, people that didn't have radio, people deep into the informal settlement, how would they know about COVID? That's how our journey started. And because we're unemployed and we come from a township with high unemployment rate, we knew that food was going to be a problem. We knew that people that would hustle in the trains, people that would sell, informal traders were told to stay at home. How was everyone going to make a living? And what were people going to eat? And government did not have a solution to all of that. All the government said was stay at home and don't go out. So being part of the CAN and Cape Town Together got us to think of, okay, let's organize food for our communities. Luckily, there was an opportunity where we could partner up with a more elite CAN that had more resources than us. We became sister CANs, and they were called Seaboard CAN. So our biggest need was food. So we decided, okay, let us start with food parcels. So while we were giving our food parcel, we're like, okay, we're giving our food parcel. These people are going to eat the food for 3 days. And after that, what are they going to eat? And the food parcel was not going to be enough for everyone. So we're like, okay, kitchens, if we used most of our money to cook for everyone to come in every day into the kitchen, it would be better. People started coming to the kitchens, and we were like, okay, social distance was a problem. So we learned from Cape Town Together how to keep people safe, how to clean our kitchens. So we started creating more kitchens, whereby by June, we had 38 kitchens that were feeding around about 4,300 people every day. And the kitchens were not just kitchens where people can come in and eat food. People had questions. Pregnant women would come up and say, the shops are closed, I'm about to give birth, what can we do? So we're like, okay, let's organize within our network, because it is a big network. Someone else in Claremont, somewhere else in Sea Point would have baby clothes. So we used what we had to exchange ideas with the resources and learning from each other on how to keep ourselves alive, and use solidarity to keep each other alive and with food. So the kitchen were more than that. It was a supporting hub for people, where we made sure that people were taught about COVID. We would even register them for COVID vaccine. Also, the other project that we worked on was the kids. Kids were told not to go to school, and we knew that in other areas, children were learning while our children were sitting down. So within the network also, we made sure that the teachers were also on vacation. So we're like, okay, the teachers that are in the township, let them teach the children that are not actually going to school. So we did classes where children would continue doing their schoolwork. We did sanitary drives because we know that period poverty is a problem. We collaborated with Ubuntu Beds when there was fires in the township and people needed to sleep. We could send people into town to go and sleep for 3 days just to relax and come back. So that was one of those things that we did. And so that is the story of the Gqirana CAN.
Thanks, Pam. I don't know, Fergus, if we want to pause here for now, maybe ask questions and maybe just take direction.
Yeah, there are a few questions coming through in the chat box. But before I get there, I'd like to prompt for both of you to share a little more about this question of where that energy has started to direct itself, and how that collaborative spirit and that energy of mobilizing resources and community from the ground up has prioritized differently according to different parts of Cape Town. Now that the so-called crisis in the formal sense has been averted, although we all know that what we're really describing here is the exacerbation of inequalities and crises that are always in existence for our context here in Cape Town. But just to speak a little more about where that energy is starting to prioritize itself, before I move on to the questions in the chat.
Sure, thanks, Fergus. I think what's been interesting is that as the world is starting to move back to normal, is that we're actually seeing that we're pivoting back into the same systems that created the kinds of inequalities. So for many of the communities where community action networks have been organizing, we had these issues around homelessness, food security, joblessness. These were issues that were already existing. The pandemic just highlighted them or emphasized them in a different way. So I think what we're seeing is that we're reverting to the old ways of doing and being. And what's been interesting for us within the CAN network is that CANs that were organized in the more well-resourced areas, so the suburbs, a lot of those CANs have actually stopped operating. And I think it will be very interesting, and Pam, I don't know if you can share a little bit about some of the CANs that were partnered with the more wealthier CANs, how those relationships have also unfolded, because I think that has a lot of lessons for us as the CANs. We've learned so much.
So some of the partnership that have happened in other CANs, you know, when someone else is better resourced than the other, they tend to want to lay some rules and all that. So some have died down and some have stayed together. And the part that doesn't surprise me, all the areas where there is high unemployment area, where all the hunger is at, the volunteerism is still at the height. The kitchens are still going because food is still a problem. That has not changed, especially with lockdown. It meant that more people lost their job, meaning that more people are unemployed. In other areas where people would have gone back to the work and life would become normal as it was, it's not the same for us in the township. The need is still there. It hasn't gone away. Yeah, so that is it.
So thanks so much, Pam and Kentse. Click through to a couple of the questions and themes that are coming through in the chat box. Again, for everybody with us, please pop any insights, any discussion points or questions into the chat box. They don't need to be questions. They could just be themes or recognitions, realizations that you'd like to share in this format. But to kick us off, Pam and Kentse, this question of, I want to say broadly, governance and governance models. Kevin in the chat sort of mentioned that for a moment in time, he saw an alternate to government. I think that's something that we can all sort of appreciate and I guess feel close to, that recognition of service-oriented, ground-up mobilization, needs-based, local, that kind of thing. And then Melissa, following on from that, sort of echoing Kevin's thought, saying that sort of her question was, I guess, something about how has this incredible ground-up mobilization intersected with local governance and government-related structures, both during the crisis and lockdowns, and now post-crisis and lockdowns. And also for those who aren't based in South Africa, we actually currently are in the midst of our local elections, which are taking place on the 1st of November. And so there's a lot of buzz and activity around that kind of topic in our country. So the question around governance, government models, and the degree to which CANs have or have not been partnering or connecting with that kind of system.
I think what's really interesting, Fergus, is it really depended on sort of like what the context was. So for example, right at sort of like the height of the pandemic and when we were organizing a meeting every day, we had a lot of members who were either public health researchers or doctors who were based in, you know, our provincial government at different levels. So because they were CAN members and working for government, we kind of had this advantage of having insider-outsiders. So they could actually lobby on our behalf on really critical issues by engaging with senior management and leadership around, you know, directing resources or attention into sort of like the work of the CANs. So for example, you know, one of the things that had been missed, and I think it was highlighted in the documentary, is that even though government was sharing a lot of information around wash your hands, do this, do that, a lot of that information wasn't considering people who were based in informal settlements or people who were utilizing public transport or people who were informal traders, as Pam was saying earlier. And what the CANs did was actually then create our own posters, create our own information that we would distribute across the network. And what ended up happening, one of our insider-outsiders was able to share that information with the Department of Health, and they actually ended up taking that content and designing posters that were officially from the Department of Health. So that relationship that we had was really positive, and we were able to leverage that in really good ways. But I also think it's important to highlight that there were individuals in the Department of Health who really believed in the work that we were doing. So that really helped. They were kind of like our champions, right? And then in other instances, especially at the local community level, the stories were a little bit different. And a lot of this was around the fact that when the CAN started working, and I think what also galvanized a lot of the action and activity was that we acted. Like one of our principles was, when we make a decision, we're going to go and do what we said we're going to do. So people in the communities actually saw that, oh, wait a minute, CANs are working, CANs are doing work. So that would often almost be in direct competition to our local ward councillors, who would often react to CANs as a threat. So they would often, you know, have questions like, which political party are you representing? How are you undermining, you know, their own leadership? And even when a lot of our CAN admins would go and try to meet with them and engage with them, they would often be met not with a positive response. Oftentimes it was, nope, this is, you know, where our line starts and this is where your line ends. So I think there wasn't a lot of flexibility and openness. And I think that was another thing that we learned, was that actually the bureaucratic ways that our state operates at whether provincial or national level makes it really impossible for them to engage with a movement and a network like Cape Town Together. So oftentimes, even when we would meet with government officials who were really keen to engage and collaborate, the first question they would ask is, are you registered, you know, as a national, as an NPO, what's your NPO number, how do you get all of these formal processes that we didn't have. You know, for us, it was really about just, if we saw that we needed to do this now, we did it. We didn't think about, oh, let's go register with the Department of Social Development, let's go. No, that isn't how CANs operated. So I think it was really challenging to a lot of government officials who were used to really, oh, this is the process, these are the steps. That made it really interesting. So I think that was some of the different ways that we engage with government. But I think one of the overall feelings that we did get, even though we did have positive engagements with government, was actually really difficult work. And I think it poses a really interesting question if we're thinking about community mobilization and power and agency around how do we engage then more meaningfully with state institutions in a way that actually serves the public good. Not in a way that actually undermines it. Because in our thinking, we were like, we're doing all this amazing work. I think, Pam, you say, we're doing the work of government. They should love us, but they don't.
That's, I really appreciate the underlining that the real takeaway at this point is more that it is a critical question at this point in time. And to frame that question and to share it and to be open about it is, I guess, where we're all at, hopefully, especially during this moment of local government elections here in South Africa. The following question concerning facilitation and recognizing group size. So if there is a recognition that in this kind of mobilization, trust, dialogue, community dialogue, that the number of people has a lot to do with the effectiveness or efficiency or trust that is enabled on the onset of a particular CAN starting, the question would then be, is there an ideal size? Is there an ideal size of a particular CAN? that started up in Cape Town, and or how were boundaries dealt with? So community boundaries, like what provided a sense of, okay, this is Gugulethu Can, this is Philippi East, this is Pinelands, etc. And if you could share, Pam, a little more about how those kinds of questions of group size were managed and navigated.
Okay, so Gugulethu is actually pretty big, where we divided it to all the surrounding informal settlements and the 4 locations in Gugulethu. That's how we divided Gugulethu, and we would have roads that would mean that on the other road would be Nyanga, on the other road would be the New Cross Ken. So because of geographically, there were boundaries where we knew that, okay, this way it starts and that is where it ends, but those boundaries did not divide us. You know, if someone came from a Ken from Nyanga East and we could help, we did. It didn't matter where you're from. That was never ever an intention. We had foreigners who were not from here, we included, because what the cans showed us, it's another way of living. We all knew that this disease was going to kill everyone if it had to. It didn't matter if you were rich or you were poor. So the way that we lived, we were like, okay, let's share. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Let's share, no boundaries, no whatever. Even if we could call ourselves the Gugulethu Can, call yourself the Nyanga Can, call yourself the Kenilworth Can. We had this network in WhatsApp where if you had a problem, you would talk, and anyone in anywhere, in any Can, if they had a solution, they were going to give the answer to that. So we had no boundaries where we could not help. If it was just geographically called Gugulethu, and we worked within Gugulethu, but when it came that we had help to give, we would help everywhere.
Thank you so much, Pam. And my sense also, to Melissa's question, is that that process seemed to have worked itself out organically, in a sense that what was most pragmatic, what was most practical for that particular area or that group or that person or that family or that home. And in the event that needs were not met, my understanding is that one would support this or encourage another neighboring community to start and provide that knowledge sharing that Kentse was referring to earlier. And that kind of sharing and encouragement seemed to have been a big part of how so many different cans started to spike during the lockdown. So moving through a couple more questions quite quickly, if you don't mind. So first off, this question of leaving people behind. In this process, were there any sort of segments of the community that struggled to connect or maintain a connection to the CAN movement? And what are the different kind of ways that at least from your experience in the CANs, you were able to handle this? It's the question of how to, who got left behind, not only in the online spaces, but also in the on-the-ground work, the pragmatic work of the kitchens, for example. So again, to you, Pam, if you don't mind reflecting on that.
Okay, so for me, I would say who got left behind would be government. It would be the councillors. It would be the NGOs, because they could not get what we were about. Here comes people helping for free, not being paid. They keep doing the work. What is the plan? Like, I think we confused people so much that they thought something is up, something this. It's been 2 years and nothing has been popping up. We're still doing the work. So for me in the community, it was those people, people in this government structure, just waiting, thinking we're going to be in the peloton with the next vote or whatever. We were just maybe just sneaking on behind them, thinking that we're going to be a political party. So for me, in our communities, it would be government, councillors, and some NGOs. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pam.
If I can jump in, maybe Fergus, to add to, and I'll be quick, because I think it's an important point that I don't want us to forget. But when we looked at the 20,000 volunteers approximately that we had when at the height of sort of like our organizing, 70% of those individuals were women. And I think that's a really important point to highlight around who was doing this work. Whether it was in our community care centers where people would go because it wasn't safe for them to self-isolate at home, whether it was in our community kitchens, our community gardens, it was women. So I think it raises really interesting questions for us in the South African context where we're dealing with high levels of gender-based violence and other forms of discrimination against women, how in a crisis, it was women who were standing up and participating and organizing in spaces like these. And that's also to highlight, to say that cans were one way the communities responded. There were so many other variations of this. So I think it's an important point to highlight. And I don't know what the answers are around then what happens about the people that do get left behind. How do we engage in meaningful ways? And I think those are some of the questions that we're still grappling with as well. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Kentse. And that helps to also give some context to one of the questions in the chat box around the gender breakdowns in the cans. So obviously that was referred to in the documentary, and to Julie's question, that's just the extent to which that breakdown was significant. And then to Caleb's question around sort of the choices of technology used to organize, and wondering sort of if you have any reflections or thoughts regarding privacy, encryption, recognizing that this way of organizing may have been a threat to certain political players, parties. I see Kevin has a comment there which actually fits right into this question of privacy and encryption to some degree. So just wondering if you have any comments on the type of technologies that you used and why those choices were taken.
I'll be honest, Caleb, and I think we touched on this a little bit in that opening address, that we literally worked with what was easiest. When we were able to initially be face-to-face, we could all come into the same space, right? But the minute that wasn't possible, we thought, what's free, what's cheap? I mean, in South Africa, we have high data costs. So we had to think about platforms that would allow for a lot of people who couldn't afford to access 1 gig of data to be able to buy 1 gig of data and jump on. So for us, that became WhatsApp. But also because WhatsApp in South Africa is a fairly popular app that people use. So that made it easier. But another platform, and I know I'm remiss to say this, but I'm not a fan of Facebook, but Facebook actually ended up being such a critical tool for us. But I also think it's important to highlight how we used Facebook. So even though we had a group that anybody could sort of post information on, we were actually very strategic around having moderators who, as Pam was saying, also acted as like fact checkers. So before anything got posted onto a group, it had to be verified that like this information is correct, it actually stands up to be, etc. So that was a space that was quite heavily curated by different members across other different cans, so to ensure like the diversity of views and perspectives. But for us, really, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Zoom. Zoom was great, but also we had people who were able to get us like Zoom accounts via their work, and then we could have like access to professional Zoom. So that made it possible for us to host co-learning sessions. So we found different ways of utilizing platforms that we had access to. And honestly, we didn't really think about, I think, Caleb, some of the questions that you're asking around like privacy, et cetera, because it was really about us engaging. What was interesting in South Africa at the time when we were organizing in this way, we passed the POPI Act, which was the Protection of Information Act, or it had already been passed, but it basically came into effect, which meant that people who were signed up to our newsletter, because we had one of our CAN members, Marcelo, who was actually operating that part of the CAN space, where we would get a lot of funding and support and resources from other organizations who wanted to collaborate with us. And that's when we started having these questions of, oh, whose email addresses are on there? How do we engage with them? But even then, we learned as we went and when we were confronted with questions like that.
Thank you, Kentse. I'm going to finalize our session with one last question and link it into an update on a little bit more about the incubator and where the incubator is at. So I've got a question here. Has anything been lost in the institutionalization bringing this kind of work into the university. As you mentioned, Kentse, there are many sort of value adds to this. And at the very same time, the university, especially UCT, is quite an elite institution with its own bureaucratic red tape. So what was gained and what was perhaps lost in this partnership? And in answering that, if you could just give us a little bit of an update on where the CAN Incubator currently is, and perhaps hand over to Pam concerning the specific and great news about the community kitchens. Thank you.
I've been on Zoom for how long and I still get to unmute. So I think probably in terms of what's been lost and gained, it would be important maybe to preface and maybe contextualize and say that the CAN Incubator within the Bertha Center exists sort of like in tandem with the CAN network, which still operates independently and separately on its own. The incubator just then becomes a space where CAN members can come into to think about questions around how do we take some aspects of this work forward. So some of the questions that we were concerned around was around if we're thinking about resource mobilization, because as people have moved on, a lot of the kinds of funding and support that we got didn't materialize in 2021. So a lot of the community kitchens specifically are thinking about how do we remain sustainable, because we know that food security is an important issue. How do we continue to advocate and actually maybe organize differently? Maybe when we were organizing in crisis, being structured this way made sense, but maybe in 2021 going onwards, it doesn't make sense. So we, within the incubator, we're creating space for thinking about those kinds of questions. So it's to say that, yes, moving into the university space is different. And I think one of the aspects that possibly maybe is lost is the immediacy. That's one thing. And I think maybe that's just reminiscent of an institution like UCT, and Pam will know, when we organize an event, we have to sign up this form, go to finance, do this. It's like a whole, thing that you have to jump through before you actually get to the thing, which is very different. And I think a lot of us struggled because before we'd decide the evening and then we'd do. So I think that's some of the pieces that we've lost, is the ability to move a little bit quicker. But one of the aspects that we're also thinking about is power. And one of the questions that we were having and reflecting on, and I don't know if anybody is familiar with some of the work by Robert Michaud and what he proposes around this iron law of oligarchy, that yes, you can start a movement that maybe is flat structured, that is collectivist, but the minute you start trying to organize and be formal, you automatically fall into like this bureaucratic trap. And I think some of the aspects of the work that we're trying to do now are raising up those questions in really important ways. So thinking about who has access to information, who doesn't, and what are the implications of that, especially with having like the separate collaboration with this institution called UCT, how do people engage with that? So I think those are questions that we're struggling with and grappling with, but I think what makes it great is that people are constantly asking those questions. It's not aspects or conversations that we're not engaging in. So I think that helps us move the conversation forward. And let me stop there. and Pam, if you can maybe tell a little bit about your reflections.
Okay, so what I can say about what we are about to do now with the 12 kitchens, it's a way where we're thinking how to keep the kitchen, how to build sustainability, with people no longer want, there's donor fatigue, then all those things. So within the CAN Incubator, we discovered that all the kitchen had an entrepreneurial idea that they wanted to pursue. So this way we could have this workshop where, as Bertha Center, come up and find new ways where we empower the kitchen into finding and teaching them about business and how to better the idea. So for me, that spoke a lot, where when it comes to university, to think of how to put sustainability within the township and to empower the township, where when this model passes, we will be able to replicate it to other different areas. So that's my reflection, where that's the good news that I want, that finally the kitchens will have something new to pursue and hopefully we will succeed in it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pam. Pam, if you'd like to let everybody on the call know what several of the current and active community kitchens are presently up to and what we'll be doing in the coming 6 weeks. And then for anybody listening who's particularly interested in any of this, including the next steps, please do reach out to us directly or drop your email address in the chat box. Thanks, Pam. Over to you.
So the kitchens will be undergoing a business course where we will teach them about business. And after that, where we will link them up with mentors and then give them a seed funding where they can start their businesses. So we need a lot of help where people that want to join us in this change where we empower people. So that's what is going to be happening in 6 weeks. Training them up and empowering them into entrepreneurial skills.
Thank you, Pam. And so recognizing that we're just on the hour, there are a couple more questions in the chat box that I don't think we'll be able to get around to. I know this question about grassroots organization and decentralized ways of sharing knowledge, information, resources. How does that compare with these pretty patriarchal, capitalist-oriented, centralized technologies like Facebook, Zoom, etc.? I'm worried Zoom's going to shut off while I say that. But it's a really important tussle, and I guess that's something that organizations like Build Up tussle with and ask pretty regularly concerning that kind of tension. But I just wanted to say once again, thank you everybody for your contributions, your thoughts, your questions. I'm sure if we were all together in a room, this would continue for quite some time more. But I just want to say again, a big and hearty thank you to both Pamela Silwana and Kentse Radebe. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you both. And just in reflection with the theme of Build Peace 2021, Computer Says No, reflecting on peace building and the dimensions of online digital mobilization and peace building, and right back again, how does it inform our pragmatic, on the ground efforts to help bring very difficult and treacherous cities like Cape Town together under a set of possibilities that may offer solutions to the biggest challenges of our time that we continue to face. So thanks for being able to give such life, not just to the theme, but also to the experience of Cape Town over this time, and how we've been able to, I guess, through those grassroots relationships and that compassion that spreads like a contagion of its own kind, keep the peace during the storms. So thank you so much to you both, and I'm going to hand over to Julie to give us some instructions about what we all can look forward to next. So over to you, Julie, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm just reading the room, and it feels like we're supposed to leave, but none of us want to. So because this conversation was so great. So if you haven't, I think a lot of people want to continue this conversation. So if you haven't, maybe put how they could follow you or get in touch in the chat. So the next step for people who are staying on board for the next session is we're going to end this meeting, even though we'd rather not, and move to a break where we'll have a break. You can either take the time, to do your own thing, or we have folks ready for you in the next room. So if you'll just scroll down on the lobby, you'll see an option to join the break networking. And there you'll have people matchmaking you to others who have shared interests. And you can take this time to get to know other activists and peace builders who are doing similar work. So you're more than welcome to join us there as we end this meeting. And thank you again, Pamela and Kentse.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.